Hello, my name is Colby. I'm here to explain to you the human thought process as it has changed and the ideas of gods and how they have changed as well. So, all throughout human history, we've had an urge to find divinity. We've had an urge to find our explanation in the universe and why the universe is the way that it is. And in the beginning, human beings didn't have a lot of knowledge, they didn't have a lot of experience. They were very young and they were only starting on very primitive concepts that we look at today as basic things that we could do with no problem. So to them, to look at the universe and look at the way that everything is set up was very strange because they didn't understand it. So they had these that would make gods or pantheons of gods to explain these things, right? So to explain, it fulfilled a lot of questions or daily events that they couldn't understand. How the sun would work. As we look at ancient Egypt, they had a whole pantheon of gods that had multiple purposes. Horus was the god of the sky, Osiris was the king of the underworld, etc., etc. They had one for the sky. And then this came along as well with ancient Greece. They had Apollo for the sun, Hera for the hearth, and Kronos for time, Zeus for the sky. Either way, it keeps going on and on and on. They had to have a specific god for each one of these concepts they couldn't understand. Now, each time that they have these gods or these pantheons, they always come to an end. They always come to a stop of thought process with it. So the Middle Kingdom Egypt started to question the pharaoh, and this would have been right just in the Middle Kingdom. And they decided the pharaoh was wrong and that he wasn't going to escort each one into the afterlife. So they had this panic. They had this of no idea what to do. So they had a democratization of the afterlife, and this kind of labeled that it's a free for all to get into the afterlife. So they had this Book of the Dead they created, and you had to basically memorize all these different passages and poems in order to get into the afterlife, and that was Egypt's way of dealing with it. And so that wasn't so. There's either two ways of really challenging it. It's just from not believing, which was kind of what Egypt did, but they still kept the idea. But then there's also war, really tough hardship that changes people. And this was first experienced by China during the Warring States period from about 476 to 221 BCE. And at this time, life was miserable. There was several different warring countries that would just be at constant war. You'd have to leave your home. All your young men would be going to fight and die. Your homes would be burned down. You have to move out because an invading army's coming through. And so they started to challenge the basic idea of Pangu, which was the usual god for that time, that era. So these people, after all this problems they had and all this hardship they started to cry out and question everything. So out of this came three different types of thoughts, which was Confucianism for the first one. And that was the idea that all of your problems came from not obeying your superiors, and you have to start appealing to people's better nature. And the second one was Taoism, which is explaining that all your problems come from wanting change. And and you need that change, but the change only comes from you. So you cannot change. You can only change from yourself. No one else can make you change. And that's how to get rid of these problems. The third one is legalism. This was the most adopted, but basically, change is what you need, right? And you know how to do that change, but your natural self doesn't want to do it. So you have to control and threaten yourself and make these laws so that if you don't do it, you're punished, so that you'll be more willing to make that change as time goes on. So that's how China dealt with that. And then the Greeks dealt with it. The Greeks had a pantheon as well, and they experienced the Peloponnesian War from 431 to 404 BCE. This was when Athens and Sparta were going head to head, and it was similar to a Warring States period, but it was just a huge all-out war. And people really started to ponder reality and ask these existential questions of what is life, why are we here? And this brought up really one philosopher, and then kind of he also branched into, he created two other philosophers that were equally influential. The first one was Socrates. His main idea was you needed to know yourself. And he says you need to know where you are, what you are, and then you'll be able to change. And once you understand yourself, you'll be fine. Now, Plato came after Socrates, and he was a skepticist. He just said nothing is real. We're just a part of a process that's the world of forms that's projecting onto us. And so he was a little different, but he was equally influential. Then the final one was Aristotle, who had was probably the most impactful because he actually wrote his stuff down, when Socrates didn't. Aristotle was a huge informaticist. He would say, gather evidence. It was first one to really have this idea of you can't say anything unless you have data to back it up. You can't be certain of anything unless there's this idea of evidence behind it to make it a certain statement. And in this, so that was how the Greece dealt with it. And this whole thing happened again. So Alexander the Great, he conquered majority of the Persian Empire and created a huge empire. And on his way back, he died, actually. And there was a huge crisis because he didn't have anyone to heir his throne. And the generals of his army and the nobles started to fight over it. This, again, another collapsed society, a warring state period in the way. These people again started to question, what is reality? What are we doing? This created three real types of thought. And the first one was Epicureanism, and all these just wanted to be happy. They wanted to live happily. So Epicureans said, live simply. In order to be happy, you have to live simply. Cut off, be as simple as you can live. That'll make you the most happy because you won't have this excess stuff. Then cynicism said to live happy, live free. This was, just live like an animal would, live out kind of under the trees, in like the cities, wherever, just kind of eat wherever you find it. That was cynicism. And they, that was another big one. And then Stoicism was the third one, and that was to be happy, control your mind. Now this was kind of along the lines of Socrates, but a little different. So basically, all your hardship you're facing is because you can't control yourself. Any sorrow you're facing is you can't control yourself. So if you control your mind, then you're fine. So each time people started to question reality and ask these existential questions after this hardship, they got closer and closer to getting to true philosophy. Now, I'll get to that later, what that means. But the only thing is that to get to this idea of true philosophy, you need an educated people and an informed people. And all this time, even with, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they still, they were advanced, they were smart, but they weren't on the near level that we are today. And so, and science was not advanced enough either. So, fast forward a little bit, the majority of, the only one that has a pantheon of gods that's left, that's big, is Hinduism. The other ones are Christianity and Buddhism, and that's the other main ones. And those are centered around one god, or one idea of a god, and those are the ones that are dominating the planet. Christianity is the one that dominates it, but those other ones have a little more of say. But by the time that we're at, democracy is so large and it's so impactful in society that war is not going to be the same that it will ever be. We won't have wars on the same scale World War I or World War II. There would be revolution before it even started. So that's not an issue. The issue now is that we will only get to this time of real challenging when we become just smart enough, where a person can awaken and say, whoa, and look at that objectively and understand that that's not how reality would work, or that's not logically how anything would follow of a God's path. Now, knowledge changes humanity. Knowledge and understanding is what propels us forward into our advancement. We're past the point of caring for, natural survival. We're not worrying about predators. We're not worried about the elements to an extent. So we can thrive on our own. We don't have to worry about other things. And so that leaves us open-ended to just advance in whatever we want. And now, as Christianity was dominating the planet in Europe, science was not really science until Copernicus came along, and he found out the Earth actually rotates around the sun. Before that, it was common to think that the Earth was the center of the universe. And so, in the late 1400s, 1500s, he found this out, and this challenged the idea of God and the Christians, so they just killed him, which was fair, and that's what they usually did. But so fast forward a little bit more, now we have the real thing that questioned Christianity, which is a lot later, where people are a lot more informed, which is Charles Darwin, the theory of evolution. So about the 1800s, he came out with this, and it challenged the idea of a divine creator, which made the majority of Christians kind of all the Christians push this idea away. And now there's just this kind of awkward tension because this guy's got mountains and mountains of scientific evidence that blatantly say that we evolved we are apes and we evolved from a more primitive ape, and people just they just stick to the Bible and they say no, you're wrong. And so along with those two, Darwin and Copernicus, also with Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, and Stephen Hawking, they came up with so many different ideas. This gives us a backbone to say no to God, to challenge it, to say you're wrong, and we can't say that definitively that anything's correct that we're saying, but we are inching towards that. We only have evidence to back up our statements. We're not pulling something out of thin air. We're only pulling it from evidence that we've gathered. And so this we're getting near that point of true philosophy. So what I was meaning there is that this is true philosophy to define as the creation of standards for human beings only after we've obtained all information and understand the nature of the universe. Now, this would be millions of years down the road. We would be very advanced. We'd have time machines, or if that's possible, other stuff like that. But so once we get there, we can then say, no, God's not real, because we understand literally everything. We understand literally everything. There'd be no argument for it, because you wouldn't have any evidence you would have. We already understand that evidence, and we have it contradictory because we have it in the science favor, or in the true philosophy favor. So, to cap up, each time we question life, each time we question the standards and the rules, it's either facing hardship, or we've become so smart we outgrow that shell. So that shell's either broken from hardship, or we just outgrow it and say, this is wrong. We can realize that is wrong. And so each push of these has led to the scientific revolution, where now God is on the way out, and there's only humanity delaying our own progress. Thank you for listening.